I know you guys all read 17.2 last night, right? Yeah, everybody read it, all right. So I have a few questions as an opener that we can discuss with the people around you. So go ahead and talk about what you know about the Northern Renaissance, which is what you read about, so anything that you can recall from the reading, and then see if you can remember the 4 major areas that it took place, the countries. So go ahead and talk to those around you.
Yes.
Okay, so go back to your seats. What did you guys talk about? What do you remember from the reading? Who wants to volunteer? Greta?
They use realism in modern Renaissance.
Yeah, their artwork used realism. Very good. Anything else? What do you guys recall? How about the countries? So what 4 areas did it take place that it identified? Isaac?
Germany.
Yep, Germany was one of them. Yeah.
France.
France and England were 2 others. And then
Italy.
What?
Italy.
Italy was in the Renaissance, but they were like southern. So who is the northern country? It's not a country today anymore, so it's a weird word.
Flanders.
Yeah, Flanders. It's a weird one to remember, and so it just reminds me of like the Little Mermaid, like flounder, and so I just always think that. So if that helps you. So what we're going to be doing today is looking at artwork for the beginning, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the literature and make some comparisons. And so I want you guys to be art critics, so just make observations about the paintings that we're going to look at the colors, what you think is happening, what you think the artist wanted you to see. So see what you can pick out. Do you think these people were poor?
No.
No. So they were wealthy?
Yeah.
Why do you think that?
Their clothes.
What?
Their clothes.
Their clothes, they have nice clothes. They look clean. Headdress. What do you notice about the woman? She's pregnant. So we would assume that maybe that's her husband. Do they look like they're very loving towards one another? No. They look kind of cold. What are the emotions on their faces? How would you describe the man? Dead inside. Maybe a little cold, yeah. How about the woman? How about the woman? She looks kind of sad, I think. She's looking down, not looking at him. She looks sad. And so this would be, the colors are also dark, so it's very like ominous. Sad painting. How about this picture? This is a painting of Greek and Roman times, but it was painted during the Renaissance. So what can you pick out about their view of this time period? What do you see happening? And it's in a school, the title of it, so they're in a school right now. What do you guys see taking place? What are they doing? Yeah, Mason.
It looks like the ones in the back are discussing.
Okay, so they're having a conversation discussing. Greta?
They're debating ideas.
Okay, so maybe they're debating ideas. What do you think about the expression on everyone's face? Can you guys, it's kind of small, but can you see any of the expressions? They all have like their own personality in a way in the painting. They all have a different look on their face, something, different thoughts in their mind. They're all engaged in what they're doing, either talking with others, looking at a book. So they're all focused. They all look like they're well off. Nobody looks like a peasant. And then this would be a statue. So this is David, this statue that we talked about yesterday. So what do you think, do you remember what this was like supposed to represent? Do you remember, it's supposed to be like the idealistic. So this is what a perfect man would look like. Like his face, his hair, those are close-ups of his face and like the angles. This is what is like glorified during this time period. And the sculpture is supposed to be perfect. Yeah. And this is a sculpture as well. This one is more religious. So this is a rather large sculpture that's in a church. These are close-ups of the faces, and so this is the one that's looking down, that's the one that's laying. These are supposed to represent, do you guys have a guess on who it represents? Yeah.
Mary and Jesus.
Yeah, that's Mary and Jesus, so they're representing, it's supposed to be the day after the crucifixion when he comes down. So that's what the artist envisioned happening. What do you see, or what do you notice about the sculpture? Does it look detailed?
Yeah.
Yeah? Do you think it would be difficult to create? I mean, there's a lot of different aspects that go into it. See her long robes are draping onto the floor, curling on the ground. What do you think the expression on her face is showing? Is she, Greta?
Sadness.
Sadness, yeah. Disappointment, fear maybe, so sad. How about this painting? Do you think this one is a little happier? A little bit? Maybe brighter colors at least? What are so these are, I just call them baby angels. What do you think the expressions on their face are indicating? What do you think they're thinking about? What did the artist think when he created it? It was Raphael who painted this one, which you guys, we covered him 2 days ago. What do you think they're thinking about? Go ahead and talk to your neighbor about their thoughts, what you see happening. Okay, so what did you guys talk about? What do you think they're thinking about? Who wants to share? Let's see, Sarah? Well, I'm thinking Beth, but I know you're not Beth, right? It's your sister.
Our group said that, like, it looks like they're looking up to heaven.
Okay. Do you think, okay, so you think they're thinking about heaven, they're not in heaven. What if they were in heaven? What if they're in heaven in the clouds looking down? What would that change your thoughts about what was happening? Yeah? So if they're not in heaven, you're thinking they're frustrated, maybe they want to get to heaven or something along those lines. But if they are in heaven, maybe they're frustrated with what they see that's going happening on earth. Maybe they're frustrated. So it's your perspective on which you see it as changes from person to person. Okay, how about this painting? okay, I guess it's dark, but there's a book down here that they're pointing at and looking at, and that's what their expressions are like caused from. Any observations about this painting?
Probably stress.
Yeah. Well, if you had to guess, where would this painting have been painted? If you could guess a country.
Wait, like, where it was painted, like actually painted, or like?
Yeah, where, like just where it was painted. Where it was supposed to be, it'd probably be like Greek or Roman, but where it was painted, if you had guessed, where would that be? Maybe Italy? Because they were drawing upon the past, it was all around them, the ruins of Rome and Greece. Especially in Italy, the ruins of Rome were surrounded, they were surrounded by it, and so their painting is a little more inspired from that time because they can see it. They're impacted by it, it's all around them. Whereas in northern Europe, their painting didn't as much draw from it because they didn't see it. So. And another one, kind of same theme. So this one is a little more interesting. So I want you to make observations about this picture because we're going to break it down a little bit. So talk to your neighbor about what you see, anything you can identify, what's happening, is it what class the people are in, see if you can guess. So what are your guys' guesses, or what did you notice about this painting? Go ahead and take your sheets. What did you notice, Isaac, about this painting?
That there were British guards.
Okay.
Or what seemed to be British guards.
Okay. So you think there's guards there, so maybe if there are guards there, do you think this is a wealthy? Or do you think they're poor? What do you think? Yeah.
I think they're more wealthy people because they're getting served primarily. That's
Okay.
especially when blues carrying that blue or something.
Okay, so since they're being served, they would be wealthier. They would have that privilege of having people serve them. What about, what kind of celebration do you think is happening? Or do you think it's just a regular day? How about, McKenna, do you have a guess? You don't think, would you guess it's a celebration or just a regular day?
No, I think it's a celebration.
Okay, do you have a guess on what kind?
I don't know, maybe like a religious or like a festival.
Okay, so a religious or festival, that could be. How about Shaylee, do you have any thoughts?
We said it was a wedding reception.
Very good, a wedding reception. Okay, so now that you guys have drawn some conclusions, there's a poem about this painting that wasn't, that I'll read to you. So maybe that can make some connections. Pour the wine, bridegroom, where before you the bride is enthroned. Her hair loose at her temples, a head of ripe wheat is on the wall beside her. The guests seated at long tables, the bagpipes are ready. There's a hound under the table, the bearded mayor is present. Women are in their starched headgear are grabbing. All but the bride, hands folded at her lap, is awkwardly silent. Simple dishes are being served. Clobber in what not from trestle made of an unhinged barn door by two helpers, one in a red coat, a spoon in his hat band. So after hearing that, do you notice anything different? It said, anybody notice that this was a barn door? Okay. And anybody know where the bride is? We know that it's a wedding reception. Yeah, Jordan?
Well, kind of hard to, like, it looks like a pole on the green like backdrop back there, right
That?
below that is the bride.
Okay, yeah, this is the bride, she has a headdress on, looks nice. And we know that this is a peasant wedding, so these are all peasants, and they're not wealthy, but it's still a celebration. Anything else? Yeah, spoon in his hat band, dogs down there. Anything else that you guys picked out?
Mayor on the far right side.
The mayor over there. Mayor looks like he's just kind of nicer than everyone else also.
That guy's
So-
pouring wine.
Yep, he's pouring wine. Do you think this painting was realistic? Yeah. So if you walked into a wedding celebration, this is what it would have looked like if you were there. Yeah, very good. So the artist used realism to create this painting. And now, since we know this is a wedding, we're going to look at, and this is also from, I think it was painted in Germany, a painting. This was also a wedding, but this one is in Italy. And so I want you to look at the differences between the two. So we have the groom, the bride. What do you notice about this painting that differs? Is it still realistic? What do you guys think? Okay.
This is taking place like in the actual wedding ceremony and not during the reception.
Yeah, that's a very big difference. So it's the ceremony. What about, does this look realistic or more idealized? Yeah, so this is more idealistic. Everyone is nicely dressed. They have the pastor or minister. Beautiful churches in the background. So it's very ideal on what a wedding should be like. So there's a big difference. You guys remember what this painting uses? Perspective. Yeah, very good. Okay, so now we're going to get into our notes a little bit. So if you guys want to grab your laptops. You don't have to write everything word for word, just try to get the main ideas down, so don't write word for word, that'll take you forever. So in the 1450s, the Northern Renaissance began to thrive. We know that the Renaissance began in Italy in about the 1300s, and so there's about a 150-year gap between it beginning in Italy and it traveling all the way to Northern Europe and throughout. Also, side note, Flanders is right over here, so it's where like present-day Netherlands are. And so that 150 years is a pretty big gap when you think about it, and it took so long because the 100 Years' War was going on. The 100 Years' War was fought between France and England, and so that took a big hit on travel and things. And the plague was also going on, and so people weren't able to travel. Trade wasn't as big because people didn't leave their city. Without trade, there's a limit on ideas that are exchanged and goods that are exchanged, and so they were kind of separated from Italy in the south, who was expanding during that time. Italy is divided into city-states, which is a difference from Germany and England, who were ruled by one consolidated power. So they had a king, whereas Italy had nobles who were in charge of various areas. And so different families had power. And so that's kind of a big difference between the two areas. And then Flanders was the artistic center of Northern Europe. So that's kind of the hub of everything artistic that went on in Northern Europe. And then, like we said earlier, England, France, Germany, and Flanders are the 4 big areas where the Renaissance took place in the north. So going into the literary writers of the Renaissance in the North, Sir Thomas More was one humanist writer from England, and he wrote the book Utopia. Does anybody know what a utopia is, or has anybody heard of it before?
Is it like a perfect place?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's talked about since his book. It's a Utopia.
That's how I know it.
Oh yeah. So this book is obviously about a perfect society. So he gives his views on what it would take to have a perfect society. He believed that men and women would live in harmony. There was no private property, and so people shared the land, they respected one another, they helped each other out. No one was lazy, everyone worked hard. Everyone is educated, which would be a big thing. The justice system is used to end crime instead of executing the criminals. And so he had all these ideas on what it would take to be a perfect society that kind of went against what was actually taking place at the time. It's kind of a cool idea if it would actually happen. It's never actually happened. I don't know if it ever could happen, but in theory, it would be a great place to live, I would guess, I would think. Erasmus. This was a Dutch writer, so Dutch would be German, humanist. And he published a vernacular form of the Bible, and so he wrote it in German, and so people could understand it, which was a pretty big deal. And he also wrote The Praise of Folly. In his writing, he used humor to show the immoral and ignorant behavior of people, including the clergy. So the clergy is an element of the church, and so he was kind of poking fun at the church, which isn't really appreciated by the church. Obviously, they were not very happy with him for doing this, but the church was doing things that weren't necessarily right and weren't necessarily following the rules of the Bible, so to say. And so he was bringing attention to those misbehaviors. And he felt people would be open-minded and kind to others in his writing, and he portrayed those ideas as well throughout his writing. William Shakespeare, I know you guys have heard of him before because you're reading, or you're watching the movie now in English. Is that right? Well, he was born in 1564. He was a famous playwright. He wrote Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, King of Lear, and Taming of the Shrew, just to name a few. He had many plays that he published in his lifetime. And he admired the classics, and he drew ideas from them. And so he was able to brilliantly create stories and paint pictures for people, like in their minds, of various things that were taking place. And he also, kind of a fun fact, he invented a lot of words. And so words that we use today were, some of them were invented by William Shakespeare. If you have time at the end of class, you can look up a list. Somebody did that last class, but it's kind of cool that he just thought of them. I think dawn is one word, so in the morning, dawn, he created it. So. So now we're going to go into inventions that occurred during the Renaissance. So one thing that was invented would be the clock. The oldest surviving mechanical clock that we know of was made in the 1300s, which would put it at the beginning of the Renaissance. And so we expect that it was invented during that time. The scientist Galileo discovered the pendulum. And so that's what swings back and forth in a clock in order to keep perfect time. and that helped make timekeeping better and more consistent, and so various clocks would be able to be consistent, and so clocks would all have the same time. And so that pendulum was a huge key in making the clocks. Eyeglasses. This was another thing that was invented during the Renaissance. It's kind of a cool invention. Although I'll throw in there that the eyeglasses weren't perfect, like we can identify prescriptions and things like that nowadays. They weren't able to do that. They just had more primitive versions of glasses. But they were invented in the 1300s, and the invention of the printing press increased the demand since more things were able to be printed and more people were learning to read. More people needed to see in order to read, which increased the demand of it. So far-sighted glasses, which is what you would use for reading, were developed first. And then throughout time, nearsighted was also developed as well. There's two examples of eyeglasses. They looked a little different than we have them now, up at the top. They often had these like sticks and didn't have them like around their ears. They would just hold them up to their eyes when they needed it. So printing. The first version of printing was invented by the Chinese in 1868, so a long time before the printing press was developed and a long time before now. So in the mid-1400s, Johann Gutenberg of Germany invented the printing press using movable type. So new books were able to be printed with greater speed, less effort. Beforehand, books had to be written by hand. So if you can imagine writing a book, even a 20-page book would take you a lot of time. And so the Gutenberg Bible is considered one of the first books ever printed. The Bible is a pretty thick book, and that was one of the first ones to be printed. How do you think the printing press impacted society? Do you think it had a large impact on what, why do you think there's an impact? Mason?
Because if there's more things being printed, then there's more reading, there's more information.
Yeah, that's great. So those connections, so when books are able to be printed, before books were kind of a really expensive commodity because they took years to create, and so since they took all that labor, they're pretty expensive and valued. And so people like peasants and even middle class weren't always able to get their hands on books. And if you can't have a book, you can't learn to read. And so people, by the invention of the printing press, people were able to get their hands on books. And when they were able to do that, they were able to learn to read. Do you think the ability to read impacted the church at all? Probably. Talk to your neighbor and think of why it would have affected the church.
But it also
People didn't have to go to church to read the Bible.
Hey, stop cheating.
Cheating.
No.
hope you all without Trevor's recording you guys. She's gonna make you pack your mini outfit and call them in the classroom. He's gonna want it there.
No.
Okay, so what ideas did you guys come up with? Why would the church have been impacted? Yeah, Tammy.
We talked about how, if more people can read the Bible, then if the church isn't following the rules of the Bible, then they would realize that and that the church.
Yeah, that's a great connection. Were any people able to come up with something different? Yeah.
So like some priests are a lot of monks, they write Bibles, so now they don't really have to, they can't write them.
Okay, so people don't really have a way to spend their time anymore. That was their job previously. It could also impact the church, that was a great connection, by if people are able to read the Bible, they may have a different understanding of it, because they didn't know before if the priest was up there reading the Bible accurately or if they were giving their opinion. The people had no idea, they weren't able to question it because they couldn't see it themselves. So they just believed what the priests were telling them. But when they were able to read it on their own, they're able to question what's happening, make their own inferences, and question the church. So that brought up some turmoil, which you guys have a reading for tomorrow, which talks about religion. And so there are some struggles that religion faces with the access that people have to Bibles. Does anybody have questions? Okay. So here's pictures of the printing press. It just slides and they pull the lever, and I don't know, big process, but it worked. And then there's a book. Okay. So now what you guys are going to do, you have a reading. So you, on Edmodo, it's posted 17.3 and 17.4. You have to do the first 3 questions for each reading at the end of the chapter. And then for the vocab ones, question 1, just go ahead and do the definitions again like you did last time. So since we have like 5-10 minutes left, you guys can get started on that. And it's due tomorrow.